During the budget debate, members of the House expressed their views on too much spending, cost-cutting measures, finding new ways of stimulating the economy, and rebuilding the economy. The opposition questioned government's resolve to put $15 million into the reserve fund instead of injecting that money into the economy. And members of the government pointed out that building the territory's reserves puts the BVI in a better financial position. Walter Barrett has this report.
As government continues to come to grips with the territory's finances, several members of the House of Assembly called for innovative ways to bring new monies into the BVI Treasury. In the interim, however, the Minister of Finance has deemed it best to rebuild the territory's reserves, starting with $15 million, a huge part of which would be derived from government's recently announced cost-cutting measures that includes a 7% cut in operational expenses of individual ministries and departments, together with a cut in the pay package of elected officials, among other things. The Premier's move to replenish the reserve fund was met with opposition, however, as member for the 2nd District, Honourable Alvin Christopher, argued that if government's goal is to increase revenue, the $15 million it is now seeking to save should be injected into projects that would generate funds instead.
There's some genuine need, Madam Speaker, and keeping that in mind, I do believe that this government going to find it necessary to avoid some of the pitfall that I am seeing, to have more fund in circulation in project that is needed. And I'm saying, Madam Speaker, and I will put the emphasis on it, on project that is needed, so that our people will not have to succumb to a lot of the circumstances that we are hearing in other places.
Minister for Health and Social Development, Honourable Ronnie Skelton, sought to show that restoring the territory's reserves has several positives to it, one being that it would allow government borrowing power in the future, as it will be clear that the BVI is in a position to manage its own finances.
The member for the 2nd, although we tried to explain, still have lost grip of what we were trying to do. And I don't want to be picking on him, but you know, he mentioned something in his debate that says that we put in too much money back into the reserves. But Madam Speaker, we have no choice. You know, sometimes you have to lose $100 in order to make $100,000. If we can get our reserves and get Britain to understand that we are responsible people once again, so that we can borrow more money, it's not $15 million, but $150 million, Madam Speaker.
Also speaking out in support of the decision to inject $15 million into the reserve fund was Minister for Education and Culture, Honourable Myron Walwyn, who called the 2012 budget a responsible one. The minister said there is a reason why the money had to go to the reserve fund, and that reason is the borrowing guidelines.
That you have to put 25% of your estimated expenditure in the reserve fund. And that money, Madam Speaker, has to be unencumbered. Nothing attached to it, Madam Speaker. So when you look at 25% of the estimated expenditure, let's say for last year, that's about $65 million unencumbered money in your reserve fund. Because the situation is this. The United Kingdom has its own problems. You turn on the TV, you see it, they're having problems like everybody else. And they cannot afford for the British Virgin Islands to become a contingent liability to them. So these guidelines were put in place that you must have $65 million in your reserve fund, unencumbered, Madam Speaker. And it goes further. And unless and until you have that $65 million in your reserve fund unencumbered, you cannot borrow any money without permission. When our Honourable Premier got aired into office in November 7th, on November 7th, 2011, there was $7.5 million in the reserve fund. A far cry from $65 million.
According to the 2012 budget, government is spending most of its revenue on recurrent expenditure, and this leaves government in a position where such liabilities as pension cannot be properly catered to.
We are collecting $290 million approximately, and we are spending $260 million on recurrent expenditure. And some of the things that we need to provide for, some of the real liabilities of this country, pension liabilities, we can't provide for those things in a sensible and responsible way because we don't have the resources. The majority of the monies is basically spent in recurrent expenditure. And Madam Speaker, 90% of what is collected is spent on recurrent expenditure.
Meanwhile, speaking on the need to increase revenue, Premier and Minister for Finance, Dr. The Honorable D. Orlando Smith, said that the cost-cutting measures made by government across the board were necessary and reflects much of what is currently taking place with many other territories across the globe. The Premier shared some of the initiatives his government has to increase revenue.
By reactivating the Business Bureau, the idea was to give assistance to businesses so that they can become more active and hence develop more commercial activity in the country and hence increase the employment in the country and hence and also the revenue to government coffers. That is one way. We know, Madam Speaker, that financial services continue to contribute as it has been, but we also know that tourism did not contribute quite as it had during the past several years. And that we now have to concentrate on making sure that it did contribute more. One of the things, Madam Speaker, that we mentioned about the whole question of tourism during the debate was the fact that the Tourist Board did not have proper accounts and were not able to properly account for the way in which to spend the money which was allocated to them. That is a fact, Madam Speaker. And with a new board and with a new accounting system in place, I expect, Madam Speaker, that this will improve.
The Finance Minister also spoke about the maintenance of public facilities such as the Bellevue Gym, the introduction of alternative energy as business opportunities as well as cost-saving mechanisms, and the development of several other sites around the territory that would serve as attractions and increase income into the BVI. Reporting for JTV News, this is Walter Barrett.